What is up, TFA fam? Back again with another waiver wire show this week. Once again, Cody is out again. You know, we have put him on IR. He's on the COVID list, and we have called up the reserve. And we got Robby rocking with us. I think this is the first time you've ever done a waiver show, so I really appreciate you filling in. You can follow him on Twitter at NFL Robby. How you doing?
Fantastic, man. Has been so far a good first playoff week 14 has been kind to me. A lot of big performances. I know we're going to go through a couple of them. Excited to jump into these waiver options.
Yeah, and before we do, we'll just get right into it. Before we do, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you're entered to win that sweet Allen Robinson authentic signed jersey. So that's all you have to do is be a subscriber and you're entered to win, and we will draw on December 27th. So let's just jump right into it. It's not a really exciting waiver week really this week, but you know, I think quarterback is certainly an area of interest this week. So let's just start off there. First up, you know, we have a couple of guys off the top. Jalen Hurts, right? Jalen Hurts played really well today, actually. Completed 17 of 30 passes for 167 yards and a touchdown, but he also, where the goodness comes in, rushed 18 times for 106 yards. This week they play Arizona, who has been a pretty formidable defense so far this year. They're 12th in pass DVOA, 14th in rush DVOA. The Eagles certainly look much improved and ran at a much faster pace today with Jalen Hurts under center. He also has the ability to open things up for Miles Sanders, which we saw, who broke off that 82-yard touchdown run. And Hurts, for me, I think is like a low-end QB1, high-end QB2 next week, mainly because of his ability to use his legs. I mean, that presents such a great floor for your quarterback whenever they can get you, you know, if they have a 100-yard upside. I mean, that is not something that not very many quarterbacks can get you. I mean, that is in the league of Lamar Jackson, you know, Kyler Murray type guys. So this is should be a fun game next week against the Cardinals. So I do think Jalen Hurts is only rostered in 17% of leagues, is something that people should really be looking at. I put Drew Brees on here because I was surprised. He's only rostered in 51% of leagues on Yahoo and ESPN. So right now the plan is for him to return this week. He has started throwing. He is supposed to return this week against the Kansas City Chiefs. They will be at home. The Chiefs are 13th in pass DVOA, but 30th in rush DVOA. I think this spells good news for Alvin Kamara, who I will say Alvin Kamara did, you know, get an uptick in targets today. He saw 10 targets today from Taysom Hill. But as we saw, Taysom Hill looks a little bit like a fraud finally, which is something that we did talk about, that I thought that there was a possibility the Eagles defense could kind of expose him a little bit. They were able to make a late run, mainly because of the fumble by Jalen Hurts later in the game. But regardless of that, the Eagles still pulled off the victory 24-21. And against this Chiefs defense, this should be fireworks. Saints and the Chiefs, that over-under is probably going to be in the 60s, if I'm willing to guess. I don't know if the lines have come out yet, but it's going to be really, really high. Past that, we have Mr. Trubisky, who's only rostered in 10% of leagues. This is his third week in a row being on the list, and he had a monster performance today, completed 24 of 33 for 267 yards and 3 touchdowns. He also rushed 4 times for 24 yards. The Bears this week take on the Vikings, who are 9th in pass DVOA, but 17th in rush DVOA. However, the Vikings have allowed the 4th most passing touchdowns on the season. Trubisky has not he has thrown for at least 2 touchdowns in 4 of his 6 starts this season, and has 3 touchdown passes in 2 of those games as well. So Mitchell Trubisky quietly has played pretty well so far. You know, he had a really good game today against Houston. This week they do get the Vikings on the road, but this is a little bit tougher a matchup. But one, I think that with all the weapons that they have there with Allen Robinson, Darnell Mooney, Anthony Miller, Cole Kmet, you know, and David Montgomery out of the backfield, like this offense is one that I think that spells good news. And Trubisky does like to utilize his leg. So I think Trubisky makes for probably like a high-end QB2 this week against Minnesota. Jared Goff is rostered in 42% of ESPN leagues. Goff was rather pedestrian on Thursday night, but they didn't really need him to because Cam, the fucking man, Akers, went out and rushed for 170 yards and just crushed this past Thursday night. Goff completed 16 of 25 for 137 and a touchdown. But the Rams this week take on the ultimate pass funnel and the Jets, who are 32nd in pass DVOA, but they're 7th in rush DVOA, and they've allowed the 3rd most fantasy points to the position. So if Jared Goff is sitting out there, I think this is a great week to start him. And not to mention, they also the following week, they get Seattle. So this is somebody you probably could look at starting for the next 2 weeks if you are looking at streaming. And then past that, I think you have Phillip Rivers, who has one of the best floors in all of fantasy football. He is rostered in 41% of leagues, completed 19 of 24 for 244 and 2 touchdowns. 2 touchdowns coming to T.Y. Hilton, and an absolute beatdown of the Raiders today. The Texans are 25th in pass DVOA, 26th in rush DVOA, and allowed the 10th most fantasy points to the position. And as we just saw, allowed good old Mitchell Trubisky to just crush them today. So this is a really good matchup for Phillip Rivers, and one that he has a really solid floor. The only frustrating part is once they get down to the goal line, they typically have been taking him out in favor of Jacoby Brissett to run some sort of wildcat, mainly because he's dealing with a toe injury. But past that, I think you can go there. The other 2 options I put on here, Derek Carr. The Chargers have been really bad against the pass. They're like 20th in pass DVOA, 25th in rush DVOA. But I think it's hard to trust Derek Carr on a weekly basis. And then Kirk Cousins was not a very good performance from him today, but the Bears' pass defense has been one that can be exposed. Not so much today against Deshaun Watson. However, Deshaun Watson really had nobody to throw the ball to outside of Kiki Kuti. So that pretty much wraps up the quarterback streaming options for me. Like I said, it starts at the top with Jalen Hurts. If Drew Brees is out there, pick him up. Mr. Trubisky makes for a really solid play as well. Jared Goff, Phillip Rivers are kind of the list. So why don't we go ahead and jump over to the wide receivers, Robbie? What do we got there?
Yeah, for wide receivers, I'm breaking them down into 2 tiers. Top tier, I'm going to lead it right off with Michael Pittman. This is a rookie that, when he kind of broke out a couple weeks ago and had a 100-yard game, I think it showed that he has the ability to have these big games if he has the right matchup. Now, he's coming off of a week where he only had 2 receptions for 42 yards on 5 targets. The Colts didn't have to throw a ton. They got up early on this Raiders defense, and they didn't have to throw a whole lot. But you and I talked about it in the morning show that, Phillip Rivers is slinging the ball most games. He's averaging about 38, 39 attempts per game. And I think after the Houston game last week in week 13, where T.Y. Hilton absolutely torched the Houston Texans, I think the Houston Texans are going to try and focus on T.Y. a little bit more, which will open things up for Michael Pittman. So, excited to see what he has to offer this next week. And as you said, they were also torched by Mitchell Trubisky for 3 touchdowns in the first half. So, this is a defense that I definitely want my wide receivers facing. So he's going to top the list. Second on that list is Nelson Agholor. He was someone that we talked about, and he's been hot and cold a little bit, but he was hot today. He had 5 for 100 and 1 touchdown on 9 targets. If we go back to week 11. Counting forward, it's week 11, he had 9 targets. Week 12, he had 6. Week 13, he had 11 targets. And then just this past week, today, he had 9 targets. So, he's obviously getting targeted by Derek Carr. You had Derek Carr on your pickup list as well. So I think if there's a wide receiver to go along with that stack, it would be Nelson Agholor. Next on the list, I think this guy's really intriguing because depending on what happens with the rest of these pass catchers with the Dolphins, Lynn Bowden Jr. could be really, really interesting. Devontae Parker left in the second quarter with a leg injury. He did not return, so we'll need to keep our eyes on that situation. Hakeem Grant, their slot wide receiver, he left for a little bit, came back, but I think we all know what he is right now. He's that slot wide receiver. He's going to get 3-4 catches per game, 30, 40, maybe 50 yards. And I think Lynn Bowden Jr. has an opportunity to expand past that. He had a pretty good game in this week. And then Mike Gesicki also left late in the fourth quarter with a shoulder injury. He had 2 touchdowns. One of his best games, I think, as a pro so far. So I think Tua and that Dolphins team will be looking for pass catchers, and Lynn Bowden has stepped up and could do it again this upcoming week. The last guy in that tier 1 group is Kiki QT. He was not the leading target receiver in this game for the Houston Texans going against a tough Chicago secondary. But if Cooks does come back, I think that moves Chad Hansen, who had the most targets, kind of back a little bit, and QT and Cooks will be the 2 starters there. So I do think Kiki QT has some good solid flex appeal as we move towards week 15. And then when we look at the tier 2 guys, I think these are guys that if you're desperate, you can definitely take a shot on them, at least have them in your lineup or have them on your roster, I should say, for this next week, week 15. And that's going to start out with Kendrick Bourne. So, ESPN's Nick Wagner said that Debo could miss the rest of the season with his hamstring injury. He left after his first touch. It was a rush for 9 yards. He came up gimpy, and it seems like he's probably going to be ruled out for week 15, if not for the rest of the year. So I think Kendrick Bourne has actually had some mediocre games, and so if you put him in right behind Ayuk, who's been absolutely balling, they face the Dallas Cowboys in week 15, and I think that's a really good matchup where Bourne, if you're desperate for something, could have some good flex appeal as well. MVS, going with the Packers, he was boom or bust like every single week. And this week he was boom again, 6 for 85 and a touchdown. He had 2 goose egg weeks before that, which kind of gives you that boom or bust. But Kev, we're talking week 15. You're in this to win this, so you're not in it to get 4 or 5 points. You want to have that guy that can potentially give you that boom week, and I think that's what MVS shows. They get Carolina, the Packers do, in week 15, and they just gave up 4 touchdowns to Drew Lock and the Denver Broncos. So I think Aaron Rodgers could definitely make MVS a week 15 winner against that Carolina secondary. Michael Gallup comes next on that list. I know that was a guy that you were kind of excited about for this week. He didn't quite have the target share that we wanted this week, but it's a carousel there. So I think he's a guy that can be picked up as they face the 49ers this next week. He'll see a little bit of Emmanuel Mosley if he's back, but if he's still out, I think there's a good chance that Michael Gallup can have a good week as well. Moving on down to Russell Gage, not only receiving the ball, but he can throw it as well. Threw a nice long touchdown to Calvin Ridley, made Calvin Ridley's week a lot better with his long touchdown. If Julio misses another week, I think Russell Gage will have a better matchup than Calvin Ridley will. Being in the slot, he plays 80% of his snaps from the slot, and he won't see too much of Carlton Davis or Sean Murphy-Bunting. So I think him being in the slot gives him a better matchup against that Tampa Bay secondary here in week 15. And then Darnell Mooney is a guy that I've posted about a couple times here. He has a really good schedule along with Trubisky coming up here for the Bears. They face Minnesota and then Jacksonville. It's obviously A-Rob's show, first and second, but Darnell Mooney got in the end zone, and I like these 2 matchups. I'm trying to play wide receivers against these 2 teams in Minnesota and Jacksonville, so he is definitely the clear wide receiver 2 behind A-Rob. And then Emmanuel Sanders. If Drew Brees comes back, and Kev, I think that's a bigger if than we're letting on, because there was a report that came out from Adam Schefter that they're not trying to rush him back. Now, that was before this loss to the Eagles, so we'll see what happens there. But there is a chance that we see another week of Taysom Hill, which is why Emmanuel Sanders is so far down the list. But he has had some production and would have more, obviously, I think, if Drew Brees were to come back. So those are the wide receivers to add here for week 15.
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see with Drew Brees. Now especially because they're kind of in that position where they could end up losing the first round bye to Green Bay, so that they really kind of need to finish out strong here. And this is obviously not a great matchup against the Chiefs to have that happen. So we'll see with Drew Brees. I know they said before the game that he has started to throw a little bit, and they'll continue to monitor him. So we'll see on that. But if he does play, I think he's somebody you definitely have to add. But we will see on that. Let's jump over to running backs. Listen, there's not a lot to talk about with running backs. Okay, there is nobody that you should be looking at as a priority add this week at the running back position, unless we get some sort of injury in the second half of this game of the Steelers and Bills game, which still I don't even think that would matter to me. Like if James Conner went down, I don't think all of a sudden Benny Snell becomes somebody that you're blowing fab budget on or anything like that. They just throw the ball too much for him to be really somebody that you want. And then same thing. And then in the game tomorrow night, the Ravens and the Ravens and Browns, there's really nothing there either. So to me, like this is just a really bad running back week. I put DeAndre Washington and Duke Johnson on here. Duke Johnson, I really don't want to play him. Even if he is active, I don't think he has much of a ceiling. We saw today he carried the ball 8 times for 26 yards. He hauled in his only 2 targets for 53 yards. Obviously they were rolled by the Bills or by the Bears, but the Texans get another really bad matchup this next week against the Colts, who are 10th in adjusted line yards, 11th in rush DVOA. And have just been really good. So I just can't trust, even if David Johnson is out, I can't play Duke Johnson. And DeAndre Washington, I think, would be an interesting play if Myles Gaskin does not return. He's only rostered in 24% of the leagues. He carried the ball 13 times for 35 yards and hauled in 2 of 4 targets for 17 yards. He had an opportunity at a touchdown late in the game, but I don't know what the hell they were doing. They put one of their defensive linemen in, and he had no idea what he was doing, didn't even try to block anybody. Anyways, he didn't score. But I will say this, the Dolphins take on a Patriots defense that has been terrible against the run. They are 25th in adjusted line yards, 30th in power, 24th in second level, and they're 27th in rush DVOA. So if Myles Gaskin were to be out again and it was to be DeAndre Washington, I do think that DeAndre Washington would be much more appealing this next week, and he would probably be the guy that I would be most interested in adding if he is still available in your leagues. But past that, I did put Lynn Bowden Jr. on here because on ESPN leagues, he has running back eligibility. So depending on what you're looking at running back position, I think you could possibly look to play him at running back if all those guys are out and they're going to be looking to roster somebody. But I don't really trust it. Like if you're this far, it's week 15, you're a week away from the championship. I can't imagine like that's where you're going to be at. It's where you have to play somebody like Lynn Bowden. So that's why I put him down here. Jeff Wilson carried the ball 11 times for 31 yards and a touchdown, hauled in one of the 3 targets for 13 yards. But this is just a really tricky situation to trust. I can't trust this backfield with so many different options with Tevin Coleman and Raheem Mostert and Jerick McKinnon. There's just so many options in this backfield. I can't really trust that. Le'Veon Bell, I put him on here. He is like rostered in like 58% of leagues. He pretty much needs Clyde Edwards-Helaire to go down for him to be relevant. And then the other guys, Tony Pollard has become more and more involved in this offense. He did catch a late touchdown late in that game as well. If you were desperate, I think that's a place you could go. And then the rest of the guys are the kind of the same guys we've continued to talk about. Latavius Murray, Jamal Williams, Alexander Madison, which I'm not even sure because Alexander Madison is still recovering from an appendicitis. So who knows when he'll be back. So I put him over in the kind of the secondary handcuff options. Travion Williams took over kind of as the lead back here today for the Bengals. I don't know why they haven't been giving him more opportunities. Just kind of see what you got in the guy. With Joe Mixon out, Gio Bernard fumbled like right out of the gate, and they started giving him touches. And then I think Travion Williams fumbled right after that. But it was just a pretty ugly game for Cincinnati as a whole. But I put him on here. If you're in a 16-team league or something like that, maybe you could look at it. The other options on here are complete. Carlos Hyde, Jordan Wilkins, Ito Smith, Anthony McFarland, Josh Adams, Sonny Michel, Jeremy Nichols. All those guys would have to have something happen to the starter. So no need to go out and really rush these guys. But other than that, that's pretty much it. I would pretty much just monitor what's going on with DeAndre Washington. If Myles Gaskin isn't able to come back, I do think he makes for like an interesting flex option this week against the New England Patriots, who are really bad against the run.
Yeah, Kev, 2 names I might throw on that list, and then let me hear your thoughts on them. Phillip Lindsay is one. Melvin Gordon left late in that game with a shoulder injury. We'll have to monitor his practice, but he's a guy that I like. If he has that backfield to himself, we saw in week 6, he ran for 101 yards. So I think that's a situation to monitor. He's 44% owned, rostered in ESPN leagues, so he's probably out there in some leagues. So I think that's a name. And then Savon Ahmed, I mean, you said Myles Gaskin. He was put on the COVID list pretty late in the week, which means I think he'll probably miss week 15. But Savon Ahmed has a chance to come back, and we saw that he got a majority of the work over DeAndre Washington, over Patrick Laird, and I think he would do that again if he were back for this next week. So I would maybe put him on that list as well.
I do think the Phillip Lindsay one is interesting. I just didn't put him on this list mainly because I don't know what's going to happen with Melvin Gordon. But I do think he is somebody that certainly should be talked about because if he were to mention, they do play Buffalo, which Buffalo is not great against the run. Let me see where they're at really quickly against rush DVOA. I know they're not great. They're 18th in rush DVOA. So they're middle of the road anyways against the run. So I do think if Phillip Lindsay, I think, is out there, and I think if Melvin Gordon misses, then I do think he's interesting. He probably then would be the guy that I would most likely want to add to this list of guys that I think that make the most sense to add. But then the other one, Salvon Ahmed, yeah. If he's back and we get word that he's going to be the starter over DeAndre Washington, I think he makes a little bit of sense too. But past that, that's kind of a list. There's just nobody that stands out to me that is just like an immediate, you have to add this guy. Because even Phillip Lindsay, I still think that he would be somebody that would probably split touches with Royce Freeman in a backfield without Melvin Gordon out there either. So I do think that, I just don't know if I would feel great about it either way.
Right. I think running back, it's a little sticky, and we did see him kind of command that workload in week 6. Obviously, that was a long time ago. It really just depends on what happens with Melvin Gordon.
Yeah, so we'll have to monitor that situation, but I do think that he would vault up the list of probably the number 1 guy that I would want to add and maybe even a speculative ad, it might be worth throwing some fab at. But let's just go ahead and jump over to the tight end position. That's always glorious. The same guys are always on the list, but here we are. Nevertheless, I do see one newcomer on this list, which I am super excited about. Let's just so go ahead, Robbie. Tell us who that we should be looking at.
Yeah, I'm going to start with your guy, man. We talked about him a little bit in the pregame show. Dan Arnold, the man. He scored 4 touchdowns in 4 games. His target share is so small, which is the problem, which is why he's down there on that list for me. But he's got to be on because he's just getting touchdowns week in and week out. So that's a name to monitor. Starting back up at the top, Logan Thomas. I mean, that's another name that we hit on. He's run the second most routes behind only Travis Kelce. He was 6 of 7 in his targets for 43 yards this week. 2 weeks ago, he was 9 for 9 for 98 and a touchdown. 4 for 20 and a touchdown the week before that. In 6 of his 8 games, he's had at least 10 PPR points, which doesn't sound great, but when we're talking about tight ends, that's excellent. He's a top 3 tight end going back the past 6 weeks. So, this is a guy that we talked about early. I know writing these streamer articles, we were waiting for the Logan Thomas breakout game. Here, it's going to be this week. It's going to be this week. And, finally in the second half of the season, we're finally starting to see that as the Washington football team has kind of run out of other wide receiver receiving options. Logan Thomas has filled that void for them. Cole Kmet is the second guy on that list. He's a guy that you hit on. I know we got a question about a tight end, and you had said Cole Kmet was a guy that you'd like to pivot to, as well as Irv Smith, who we'll get to as well. So Cole Kmet has had a 70% snap share over the past 4 weeks. He was 4 for 41 this week. The touchdown went to Jimmy Graham. Would like to see that touchdown go to Cole Kmet. But he was 5 for 37 the week before with a touchdown. He has Minnesota and Jacksonville. I'm going to say that every single time we're talking about a Bears player the next 2 weeks. I think I want to try and play a lot of them. So, yeah, those are 2 great matchups I want to take advantage of. And you can definitely move the football against those 2 defenses. Irv Smith is next up on that list. He's the guy that you touched on in the pregame show. He had 4 receptions for 63 yards and a touchdown. He faces Chicago, who we talked about was their 4th worst against tight end. And if the sun isn't in Jordan Akins' eyes, they give up another touchdown in this week. But unfortunately for Jordan Akins, he had the sun in his eyes and he missed a wide open touchdown, which I was very frustrated about. Had him in quite a few DFS lineups. But yeah, so I think Irv Smith is a good speculative ad. If Kyle Rudolph misses again, Kyle Rudolph was set to make his 99th straight start. So there's a little fun fact for you. Almost made it to 100. Unfortunately, he missed this week. We'll have to see if he's back for week 15. Jordan Akins, just talked about him. Could have had a much better week if he had caught that touchdown. He was wide open, but he's a guy that continues to see a good target share. We're talking about a lot of pass catchers exiting. Will Fuller, obviously out for the rest of the year. Brandon Cooks, we're not sure of his status. So they got Akins involved, or they tried to get him involved. They gave him 6 targets. He only caught 3 of them, unfortunately, but I think he's a name to monitor. And then Dalton Schultz, he just continues to run a ton of routes. He is your safe. If you need, 6 or 7 PPR points, 8 PPR points, he's your guy. He's had at least 4 receptions in 10 of his 13 games. The only problem is he's not finding the end zone. He's only found the end zone twice, and he's only had above 50 yards twice. So I think he's your very safe option if you need just some points, but not much of a ceiling there with Dalton Schultz. So that's why he's a little bit lower on the list.
You can talk more about Dan Arnold if you want.
Dan Arnold, if he keeps on finding the end zone, he's got to be in the lineup. Dan Arnold, that's your guy. I think you need to tell the world why you were so right on Dan Arnold.
I'm always right on. It's always Dan Arnold's season. Dan Arnold is a national treasure, sir. And my love for Dan Arnold goes all the way back to, I think it was the year before. I think it was 2 years ago for the Saints, and has continued on. And I was really excited for him this year because I knew he was going to be the pass catching tight end in this off. And hey, Kyler Murray, just keep looking for the man in the end zone because he scores some touchdowns. But he is boomer bust, certainly tight end. He's basically tight end dependent or touchdown dependent tight end option. But regardless of that, I think that is the list for the week. I think there was a couple of questions here. We'll hit those up really quick, and then we'll wrap this thing up with a bow. Or should I stick with Herbert from Travis Elkins? Yes, they get the Raiders this week, and if you haven't been paying attention, the Raiders' fucking defense is absolutely just atrocious. They actually just fired their defensive coordinator, Paul Gunther, as well. So are you in agreement there?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
I get it, because I think a lot of people looked at this matchup today against Atlanta and felt like that this was a matchup that he should have torched on. And I will say that Atlanta's defense has gotten better once Raheem Morris has come on, and they've slowed down the pace tremendously. And so right now, this defense has been playing better as of late. So a matchup against the Raiders is definitely one that Herbert should get back to being Justin Herbert.
Shouldn't have got that haircut, man. He should have kept the flow.
Yeah, it looks like David has Pittman. Really? Why? It really depends on the situation. I mean, I know he only got 5 targets today, but it really wasn't a matchup they really needed to throw the ball as much as they really needed to. They pretty much just ran right down their throat with Jonathan Taylor. But to me, I mean, I think Michael Pittman is somebody that if he's available in any league, I would roster him for sure. Yeah,
and just to kind of back that up a little bit, going back, they're playing Houston again. The Colts are here in Week 15. They just played in Week 13, and T.Y. Hilton was the main recipient in that game. Went off for 2 touchdowns, just had a fantastic game. And I think that's going to be, if the Houston Texans want to be in that game, they're going to need to try and slow down Hilton. And I think that opens up stuff for Michael Pittman. When you're looking at your Week 15 rosters, you want to see upside. Like you've been telling people weeks, we've been telling people weeks, roster Cam Akers. He's been on in waivers and free agency from the middle of the week when he wasn't getting, or middle of the year, I should say, middle of the season when he wasn't getting any touches. But what's that upside? What's the potential boom factor? And I think that same type of thing relates to Michael Pittman as well. He's a type of wide receiver that he can absolutely have a 100-yard game, a pair of touchdowns with a Colts offense that's throwing so much. So, yeah, he didn't have the greatest game last week, but I think that's where you get tripped up in fantasy. If you just try and play off of last week, you're going to get caught, chasing points or leaving points off the table for future weeks. And I think Michael Pittman has a really good opportunity against this Houston Texans, which are third worst. They've had the third most touchdowns given up to the wide receiver position, and they're bottom 10 against that wide receiver position.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing, like you mentioned with Cam Akers, is a perfect example of something that people should be paying attention to in the coming years ahead that you play fantasy football. Right, it happens almost every single year that there's players that we overdraft a little bit, and i.e. Cam Akers. Cam Akers was like a 5th or 6th round pick for most people in redraft, right? And then fantasy owners get tired of them and they drop them after 4, 5, 6 weeks, and then inevitably they break out in the second half of the season and they become, one of the best waiver ads. And so I think oftentimes we end up overdrafting some players sometimes when we think we know something about how a player is going to perform, especially a rookie, which is hard to project. And then, but this happens all the time. Almost every single year we see this happen where everybody gets rostered. Like Nick Chubb is another example when he was a rookie. I just off the top of my head, everybody dropped Nick Chubb because he wasn't doing anything for the first half of the season and then exploded in the second half. And this is just kind of the way things go. But regardless of that, yes, I think his upside is there. And so that's why I would want him over a lot of wide receivers that you possibly could have at this point. And, people are going to be looking for guys if you own like Deebo Samuel and stuff like that, who I think you can actually drop now. I don't think you have any reason to hold on to him. A good DST next week or start Bucks. So the Bucks are against the Falcons. I would probably lean the Bucks, honestly. It just really would depend on who's out there because I think there's some different options. The Browns would definitely be an option that you could look at if they're available, especially maybe if people have dropped them because they're playing the Ravens this week. I think the Dolphins, if people drop them because of they played Kansas City this week, people didn't want to play them, so the Dolphins get the Patriots, which we've seen how bad that offense is. I'm not even sure if Cam Newton's going to start next week. I know Bill Belichick said that he's their starter, but I don't know. That dude looked terrible.
Yeah, I think there's a handful of good starts this week. Most of them are probably already on people's teams. You have Pittsburgh against Cincy. They're obviously going to be rostered. You have the Seahawks against Washington. They're going to probably be rostered. For other defenses out there, I think you named a couple of good ones there. Chicago against Minnesota, it really just depends on what that rushing attack is able to do. I don't think they're the end of the world because Kirk Cousins has shown that he can turn the ball over as well. So yeah, there's a couple of defenses out there, but Tampa Bay is probably an okay start. They're going to be a top 10 defense for me.
Walito with the Dan Arnold, eggplant emoji. Yes. very much so. TN really quickly, then we're going to get out of here. Should I drop Ahmed for T.Y. Hilton, or I could drop John Brown for T.Y. Hilton? Drop John Brown for T.Y. Hilton.
John Brown, absolutely.
Yeah. So I think that pretty much does it. I think, there's always got to be
right when you say it every time.
Jake, should I pick up Tim Patrick? Is he reliable enough in the fantasy playoffs? Yes, I think you could pick him up. He's actually been really underrated this year. He has scored double-digit fantasy points in multiple weeks this season. He scored it again today, found the end zone against the Panthers. And they do get the Bills this week. On Saturday night, we get the glorious 2-game Saturday night slate this week, which I'm super excited about that. So that should be a lot of fantasy goodness there for that. But yes, I think you can. The Bills secondary is certainly beatable. So I do think that Tim Patrick should be rostered.
Yeah, Tim Patrick definitely could have been on this list as well. His big thing is just volume. He had the one breakout game, I think, with 119 yards a couple of weeks ago. I say that he's had 300-yard games. So when you say that underrated player, that's just it. Like, he's had 300-yard games, and that would have fooled me. So, I definitely think that Tim Patrick should be on that list as well.
I definitely agree. Tam, thanks guys for all my teams are heading to semis except one. That's what I'm talking about. That's what we're here for. Make sure you hit that subscribe so you can win that awesome Allen Robinson signed authentic jersey. We will be giving that away December 27th, so we got a little bit of time here. But make sure you get that. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. We're also be giving away some other stuff like some TFA shirts, and some other stuff like that. But I really appreciate everybody checking out the show, and we will see you guys again next week. You can find me on Twitter at FantasyRat13. You can find Robby at NFL Robby, and we will be seeing you guys again on Wednesday for our live show. You guys have a good night.